At about 1:30 in the morning, a woman named Cassie Stratton was standing on her balcony on the 4th floor of a beachfront condominium, talking to her husband on the phone. He was 1,000 miles away in Washington, and it was an ordinary call in the middle of an ordinary night, until it wasn't. She told him the pool was caving in. Below her, in the dark, the pool deck was sinking into the ground. "The pool is caving in," she said. "Everything is shaking." And then, on the other end of the line, her husband heard her scream, and the phone went dead. It would be more than 2 weeks before they found her. Cassie Stratton was 40 years old, and she was one of the first of 98 people to die that night, in a collapse that, it turned out, the building itself had been warning about for years. The building was Champlain Towers South in Surfside, Florida. 12 stories of oceanfront concrete just north of Miami Beach, the kind of place people retire to and raise families in and think of, rightly, as permanent. At 22 minutes past 1 on the morning of the 24th of June, 2021, roughly half of it fell straight down. Not toppled, fell, floor onto floor onto floor, in about 10 seconds, while almost everyone inside was asleep. A security camera down the street caught it, a wall of dust where a building had been. By the time the sun came up, rescuers were standing in front of a sheared open tower, bedrooms and kitchens exposed to the air like a dollhouse, and a mountain of pancaked concrete where the rest of the apartments used to be. They would dig in that pile for weeks. In the end, 98 people were gone. It remains one of the deadliest structural failures in American history that did not involve an attack or an earthquake. A building that simply, on a calm night, gave up. To understand why, you have to go down. Below the lobby, below the apartments, to the part of the building nobody thinks about. Champlain Towers South opened in 1981, and like a lot of Florida beachfront towers, it was built over a parking garage with a wide pool deck laid on top of that garage like a lid. That deck was the problem. The concrete slab under the pool had been poured flat, with no slope, which meant that when it rained, or when the pool splashed, the water did not run off. It sat there, and soaked in, and went looking for the steel. Every slab of reinforced concrete is really two materials keeping a promise to each other. Concrete that resists being crushed, and steel bars inside it that resist being pulled apart. Water breaks that promise. It reaches the steel, and the steel rusts, and rust swells, and the swelling cracks the concrete from the inside, which lets in more water, which rusts more steel. For 40 years, quietly, in the dark under that pool, that cycle ran. And here is the part that turns a tragedy into something harder to bear. They knew. In October of 2018, nearly 3 years before the collapse, the condominium hired a structural engineer named Frank Morabito to look at the building. His report did not hedge. It found major structural damage to the concrete slab beneath the pool deck. It described the flat, non-draining design that let water pool. It said the damage would get significantly worse if it was not fixed, and it recommended repairs in the near future. This was not a vague worry or a hunch. It was a 9-page document written by an expert the building had paid for its judgment, saying in plain terms that the structure was hurt and needed help. The report went to the people who ran the building, and then, for the most part, it sat, because fixing it was going to cost money, a lot of it, eventually a $15 million repair program that every owner would have to help pay for. And repairs that expensive are easy to study and discuss and put off for one more budget year. 5 weeks after Morabito's report landed, the residents held a board meeting. and a local building official stood up to talk about it. According to the minutes of that meeting, he reassured them. The building, he said, appears to be in very good shape. Imagine being in that room. You have just been handed a report that uses the words major structural damage, and a man with a title tells you the building is in very good shape, and you want, more than anything, to believe him, because the alternative is a special assessment you can't afford on a home that is supposed to be the safe thing, the solid thing. So the report became a project, and the project became a plan, and the plan waited. 2.5 years went by. The $15 million repair was finally approved. The main structural work had not started. The building, meanwhile, kept telling them. Federal investigators would later reconstruct the final weeks, and what they found is almost unbearable in hindsight, because the signals were there and legible. Cracks in the planter walls, water coming into the parking garage faster and faster. In the first days of June, 2 of the connections where the garage columns met the pool deck began to fail, and in the hours before the collapse, a section of the pool deck detached from the slab completely. A resident photographed standing water and damage in the garage. People noticed. But noticing is not the same as knowing what you are looking at. There was no gauge, no alarm, no system that could take a crack in a planter and a puddle in a garage and translate them into the one sentence that mattered. Get out tonight. The building was failing slowly and visibly and measurably over weeks, and no one had the means to read it. And then it stopped failing slowly. When it came down at the pool deck first, and the collapse ran up and through the tower from there. In the days that followed, Surfside became the center of the country's grief. The pile lit around the clock, search and rescue teams and their dogs working in the heat and the rain. Families gathered behind a fence that filled, day by day, with photographs and flowers and the faces of the missing. 98 of them. Some were found together, families in a single apartment. The remaining part of the tower, too damaged to leave standing, was brought down in a controlled demolition on the 4th of July, so the searchers could reach what was underneath. There was no villain to arrest at the end of this one. No CEO in handcuffs. No criminal trial. It resolved instead the American way. A settlement of roughly $1 billion, paid out among the association and the engineers and the developers, and everyone else with a share of the blame, to the people who had lost everyone. Money for the unpayable. The night divided people by feet and seconds. The collapse took the center and the eastern wing. The western wing, still standing but cracked and leaning toward the void, held people who woke to a roar and a wall of dust, and had to decide, in the dark, whether the floor under them was next. Some walked down through stairwells thick with concrete powder, past doors that opened onto nothing, and out into the street in their bare feet. Others, one apartment over, one floor up, did not get the chance. That is the particular cruelty of a building failure. It is not a fire that gives you a hallway or a flood that gives you higher ground. It is the ground itself, chosen for you while you sleep, and the line between the people who told this story afterward and the people who became it was often a single load-bearing wall. Whole families were found in the places they had gone to bed. Parents and children in one unit, grandparents in another, recovered together because they had been together when it happened. In June of 2026, 5 years later, the federal investigators finished. Their verdict was not that a freak thing had happened. It was that the pool deck and the slab beneath it had been built weaker than the code required, in some places providing less than half the strength they were supposed to, with reinforcing steel misplaced, and, in spots, too little of it where the columns needed it most. A design too weak, a construction that fell short of even that design, and then 4 decades of water finishing the job. Every layer had a margin that should have caught the next one, and every margin was thin. But the finding that lingers is the quiet one. The building announced its own death for weeks, in a language no one was equipped to read. So the country changed the rules. Florida, and then others, began requiring older buildings to undergo mandatory structural inspections on a schedule, and to actually fund the reserves to fix what those inspections find. No more studying the damage until the damage decides for you. You would like to file this undersolved. It is not. In July of 2026, a high-rise in the middle of Manhattan, an old office tower being converted into apartments, with new floors added on top, wider and heavier than the ones below, had 2 of its columns buckle and had to be evacuated as engineers watched it move by fractions of an inch. Nobody died. The warning came in time. But it was the same shape of failure, load and stress accumulating in a structure, signals appearing, and a race between the people who can read them and the concrete that cannot wait. Cassie Stratton stood on her balcony and described in real time a building doing something buildings are not supposed to do, and she did not have the word for it, because none of them did. The report had the word. It had been sitting in a drawer for 3 years. The building was telling them the whole time, but the postmortem writes itself. The only question is whether anyone reads it before the next one.